Okay. So welcome. My name is Joe Altwer. I'll be painting still life this afternoon. We'll see how far we can get in the time that we're given. I'm going to be painting with a live audience as well, so they'll be asking questions. And yeah. So I trained in Florence, in Italy, at the Florence Academy of Art. And part of their program is still life painting. So it's a part of our training there. And I can explain a little bit of that to you now. So basically how we have things set up is we're going to be working in site size. So as you can see, we have our still life already prepared here in front of us. And then just next to it, we have our canvas. We have it just basically the same line as the front of the tabletop here. If you wanted to make it more true to life size, we probably have it sitting a little bit further back in the painting. So we have this next to each other. So site size works when you observe from a fixed point. So I'll be standing with a marked place on the ground here. And as I was describing before, basically site size is this. When we're standing from our viewpoint, whatever we see through this little window is what's going to be transferred across to our canvas. Okay, so I find it incredibly useful with still life painting, especially for that. Okay, so I guess I started mixing on my palette already as everyone was setting up here. Some colors for the painting itself. So I'm going to continue this just for another minute or so, and then we'll get into drawing and into starting the painting.
Hey Joe, can you mention the colors that you're using? Because I know people always ask that every single time.
So the palette that I have here is actually my landscape palette, but I basically use it for everything. So I have white, which normally is either titanium white or lead white. Lead is always preferable, but for landscape painting it just takes forever to build up value, so I use the titanium. I have a cadmium yellow light and a cadmium yellow medium. I don't use the light one as much, but it's always there, just drying up on the palette. With the cadmium colors, it's really nice to get good ones. They're quite expensive, but it's worth it. They last a bit longer and they give you a nicer color.
What brands do you?
The brand of paint. I use.
Ask in the mic, you guys, because no one can hear the question. They won't hear the answer.
Yeah. They ask what brands.
Just flip it on the switch.
What brands do you recommend starting off with?
Starting off with, good question. It's one of those things where they are expensive, but when you start off with the cheaper paints, they tend to have a lot of filler in them, so they're not as strong. So then you end up just wasting a lot, and the colors get a bit muddy very fast. So I think getting, something. Gamma's a good brand that's not expensive and it's not that cheap, but it's actually reasonable. I've been using Gamma a lot. Also, Michael Harding paint is very good. The cadmium colors I've been using at Williamsburg. I used Old Holland for a while too, but I found the paint too stiff. It's very dry, and I have to add a lot of medium to it to make it move. So I really like the Michael Harding paint a lot, but there's a ton out there. Sometimes I even use the Rembrandt paint, which is actually quite cheap as well, but just for the cadmium yellow light that I almost never use, just to have it there. Okay. Okay, so the other colors here, a good yellow ochre is really useful. Right now I'm using it's a golden ochre. It's just a little bit more transparent, and it's a bit warmer. Cadmium orange, a cadmium red light, and then also a alizarin crimson. And then ultramarine blue, and this one's manganese blue. It's supposed to be cerulean, but manganese is a little bit cheaper, so you can get away with that. And then another one is transparent red oxide, which is this kind of rusty looking color here in the corner. Okay, so the only one that I would use for still life, which I don't have right now, is the lead white. I just didn't bring it with me when I came down. Okay, but we can make do. This is with titanium, it's so opaque that sometimes it just kills the color, and it's really hard to go and darken things down once you start. But with that said, it's actually really nice to fix dark problems. So you can really go back quite a lot. Okay, so on my palette here, I can just quickly describe that too. The way I arrange my palette, it might make more sense in just like 5 minutes, but so here I have my colors positioned from light to dark. Okay, so on my palette, as I start pre-mixing some colors for the still life, I also keep that in mind, so I kind of follow the same like kind of scale, as we can say. So I have lighter colors towards the white side of the palette, and they start to darken as they come across. The colors I'm going to mix up will be, something for the tabletop background. The objects will all have a general light color if it's the same. If there's different light colors, they'll have one kind of salmon color, a halftone version of that, and also a shadow version of that same thing. And that just allows me to see the contrast of my palette, because a lot of the times when we mix colors, they all become exactly the same, but because the colors are different intensities, you think that they're different values. Okay? So when it's here, it's more obvious to see what's going on. It's just organization. And I find that quite helpful. I also pre-mix the colors with a palette knife. You can also use a brush to do the same thing. Again, if I do it with a palette knife, I just have more of that color, so when I need it, I can grab at it. When you mix with a brush, it's like every brush stroke, you have to kind of remix it. So I usually do that towards the end of the painting, but for the beginning section of it, or the blocking part of it, super blue. I don't bother with it. Okay, so what I like to do is get just a couple of colors for the donuts, and then we can actually start. So if you see me holding my palette knife up, what I'm doing is just overlapping the color that I want to try to get to. I explained this earlier, but I close one eye, overlap it, and as I'm trying to judge the value, in color, so if I'm trying to make something for this area of the still life, when I'm standing back, I can overlap that area, close one eye, look away from it, so I'd be looking actually, instead of looking at my palette knife on top of here, I focus my attention here. And with my peripheral vision, I see when they disappear. And when they disappear, you got it. Okay, but again, all these mixtures are going to be adjusted the second I touch the canvas, because as we start painting, things will change. Okay, what looks like a kind of weird purple color now might look really different when it's on the canvas. So these are just kind of starter piles to kind of get you to feel more comfortable. Okay. So lots of people, especially when I was studying, it's like you mix this paint for like 3 hours, and then you go to make a brush stroke and it's wrong, and 3 hours of your life just went away. But if you think of it as just being something to get you started, it makes you do it faster, and you're also more likely to change it as well.
Hey Joe, have you done anything special to your canvas to prepare it?
Yeah, I was going to make a joke, but I decided not to. Yeah, so what I did with this, it was white at the beginning. So I did a painting I didn't like, and I wiped it off, and that's what I got. But what I usually do is I take off the white of the canvas. It just, it's a bit easier on the eye to start with. I find that when you start on a white canvas, everything looks very wrong at the beginning. Like you go to paint the color value that you see here, and it's actually darker than white. And then all of a sudden everything doesn't make sense anymore. So by knocking off the white at the beginning, I just like it. I think it's nice. The color is nothing special. The color should be as neutral as possible, I think, unless you really want to try to get some special effect. So again, the best color is like when you clean your palette at the end of the day and you make some weird gray color. Another thing that I found helpful at one point in my life was if you take the pure color by itself, okay. So the red by itself looks bright, no? It's actually quite a dark color when you put it next to something that's white. It kind of drops down in value, okay? So when I'm trying to get the color of this kind of weird frosting, you could even take that pure color, hold it over the top and see how close you are from the beginning. Okay, this is too dark still, but as I was mixing here on the palette, it seemed like it was getting correct in value, and when you hold it up, all of a sudden it's way too light. And also the chroma, like the intensity of the color, it seems to be too dull. So by adding more pure color to it, it'll darken it down, but also make it richer in color, which makes it look brighter all of a sudden. Okay, so let's put that to the side. If your objects ever share colors, no? So if I'm trying to make something for this guy and it seems to be really similar to something else, I don't need to make separate colors for them. I can just share that. It's only when the value is really different then you want to think about it. The medium as well that I'm using is just oil, linseed oil, and paint thinner. So turpentine, the cleaner the better. I started using lavender spike oil as well, which is kind of nice. It does the same thing, it smells a bit better, but it doesn't dry as fast. So if you're looking for something to kind of evaporate and dry faster, then I would stay away from that one. But okay, so as soon as I make some of this kind of donut color, then make one shadow version, and then we're ready to go, I think.
Joe, I have a question. How did you arrange your composition? Why did you place the donuts in the way you did? Are there any thoughts to that?
We can thank Ina for that. You can thank my girlfriend for doing that. No, basically when I was arranging them, you know, since we're working with objects that all have similar shapes to them, it's a bit tricky. When we're setting up compositions, we're thinking always about having, you know, different sizes of shapes, numbers, textures, you name it. No? So when we're playing with the donuts, they all have this kind of, at least the ones I chose, have similar sizes. They're almost all the same size and similar shapes. So the way we play with that is by overlapping them. No, it changes the shape. Now there's one bigger shape compared to the second one. No? I took a bite out of this one so it wouldn't be the same circular shape. And also I was getting a bit hungry. I broke, again, another one into smaller pieces just so, again, we have scale. No? So again, we don't have repetition of too many similar shapes. And I also put something vertical in it to kind of break everything being on the same level. But the other thing I was thinking about was the values as well. Having something that's bright, having something that's in the middle value range, darker one, and having kind of like a gradation in the background. Okay. Usually when I set something up, I go crazy and I spend way too long doing it. But really it's when you squint your eyes at it, if it still makes sense, if you can see the objects and there's a nice light impression, it's going to, you know, lead itself to being a painting. It's when you squint at it and nothing makes sense, like you don't know what the objects are, all the values become exactly the same, it becomes much more challenging. It's definitely not to say that that should not be done at all. I think if you can pull it off, you're a genius. No? But, I also set this one up today so it's a bit clear, you know. I didn't want to challenge myself too much in front of everyone. But yeah, it's more for that. Just learning how to deal with similar shaped objects. The placement on the canvas, I'm not going to worry about too much today. I'm going to make sure that the spacings from the bottom here and the top are not the same, and from the sides. Okay. If I end up painting it and don't like the composition, I can always just cut off some of the board and change proportions and shape. So, and again, that's why if you do these little studies before we start, they really help answer those questions. You know? If you're wondering what should this shape of the canvas be, you can answer that question with doing a little sketch beforehand.
Joe, would you be using side size for your studies or color comps, your sketches?
Yeah, I do it again just for the sake of speed. When we're doing that, the easel is closer to us. It's just here, and our palette's in front of us, and we can just basically shovel on paint and correcting things as we go. But really the benefit of that is that when you stand here, you can see both of them side by side. So all you have to do is this to compare them. You know, if you're kind of mixing and painting over here and have to look back over your shoulder the whole time, you forget in that split second what you're going after. But I think really it's just I'm so used to doing it now that it just feels natural to do it that way. You know, when you're painting outside in the landscape, you don't always find a situation that works for side size, so then you have to kind of just make do by comparing. Okay, so I think we'll call that it for mixing, and I'll just keep going with my light. I can do one more color.
Hi.
Hey.
What are you painting on? Is that a board or is it a
This thing
canvas board?
on the
Yeah,
there.
how do you compare it?
That one I got from the store. It's just a piece of linen that's glued to a piece of wood, I believe, or a hard board of some kind. When I mean, we used to make our own canvas. We'd buy raw linen and we'd glue it with animal glue, size it, and make our own oil ground and whatnot. But then you have to kind of think about what size you want to paint when you're doing it, and it also has to dry for a while before using it. So when you can, it's great. When you're in a rush, just going to the store is good. But I usually get oil prime linen. Yeah, materials are really great. If you ever have the time to make your own stuff. I used to make all my own paint as well with a friend. You learn that every paint is different, has a different character. When you buy it at the store, everything's the same kind of texture. And when you make it yourself, like ultramarine blue is like the most stringy, weird, sensational, whatever you want to call it, thing. So it's interesting too. Okay, I'm going to stop doing this now. Okay, so before I start, I'm going to just sketch out the big shapes with a piece of charcoal on the canvas. Okay. This is where you can start asking all the size questions. The other nice thing about working in size is that it forces you to stand up, and you walk back and forth constantly. So you can use as many donuts as you want and not feel guilty about it. Okay, so starting out, there's a whole thing like, I'll try to make this as short as possible, but just for it to make sense again. When we're doing side size, we can use a piece of string. The mirror is a bit confusing at the beginning, so string is more straightforward. When we stand in our viewpoint, okay, close one eye, we hold the string out. We put the string on top of, let's say, the cup that's there, across our canvas. You have to remember where that is on your canvas, and you come up and you just touch where the top of the cup is, okay? Afterwards, you guys can come and try this if you want and see how it works, okay? So the string, that's how we do it with the string. The mirror does the same thing, but it's a bit more complicated. It reverses the image, so it goes backwards across the canvas as you do this. And it's only good for just measuring the heights. It just gives me less things to hold in my hand as I'm working, so I use the mirror. Okay. So I go for the extremes first. I say, where's the top of my highest object, and then the lowest one. And I can already see how much spacing I'm leaving on the canvas for composition. And if you don't like it, you move your canvas up and down, or the still life up and down. So it's kind of a memory game when you're starting out here. You know, like where is that point in the canvas that I remember? We're still thinking just about heights. The bottom of the cup will be about that big. Okay, so now I'll keep going with the other objects, but before I do that, I want to place the objects horizontally, maybe? That's how you say it. So I'm standing here. Again, I can stick my arm out, have something for measuring device. I do that between my finger and the other end of the stick, and I move it straight across. Okay. I'm just thinking about how much space I want to leave on either side of it. So let's say I want to like have one object about there. So if I do that, then the other object is going to end about here. Okay. And I want there to be more space here and less space here, so I can just simply move over one object, same distance. Okay, so now I have my parameters set up. I have this, and I also have from there to here. This is probably the most exciting part, isn't it? Just watching little dots happen. Okay, that's the bottom of the other donut. Okay, so once I kind of establish a few points here, and then I'm just going to let myself draw and not worry so much about. So that's the limit. So it seems really kind of like robotic in a way right now. When I usually start without everyone watching, I kind of go for the big shape of everything very quickly, which I'll do in just 1 second. And then when I have the shapes down, I'll just start moving them around until they start making more sense. Okay, so I can just start blocking out my shapes.
Are these basically the same techniques you would use to do landscape outside?
Yeah, basically the same. I wouldn't spend so much time kind of measuring everything, you know, but I would definitely work with my canvas and the view like that and kind of just go between them. Just for like kind of the same step as I'm going to do here. So we get the bottom of all the donuts going back to the cup. I find it once I get a few lines and I get a big shape there, then I can actually start just comparing abstract shapes.
Joe, is this side size technique something that you're covering in your new master's course that you've been recording?
It sure is. Everything. Yeah, when I work with a figure too, I almost work entirely using the side size technique, if you call it that. We just finished here at the New Masters Academy doing a rendered charcoal drawing, which is back there. And that just describes how we use it with the figure, a bit more in detail, and also the process of developing the drawing a bit more. Which is basically the same steps, but just, you know, more refined. Again, the reason I like using side size with the still life is the still life usually doesn't move. When I say usually, sometimes it does. People eat your objects. Okay, so a lot of walking back and forth here. He's helping me out. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so what I want to do here is just keep going after the big shape of things. So the big shape of things is, that's going to be difficult, isn't it? No, just kind of like making an outline or an envelope shape around the objects. Here, all these objects can be grouped together as one. Okay? And then we'll subdivide that in 1 second. Okay. The reason I do it all as one is if I did everyone piece by piece, you start focusing as different pieces, and we want to think about it as one larger shape. Okay. And I also did that on purpose when I set up the painting for that reason, so they read as one. Okay. So the drawing here, I want to get not perfect at all, because if it's perfect, I'll end up just filling it in, like those paint by number books, which is what I do on Saturdays in the afternoon. No, but really the reason behind that is that if you complete your drawing before you start painting, is you don't search for the drawing anymore. And we constantly want to be correcting the drawing. If that makes sense. It's also just an excuse for me not to do a perfect drawing. So in this kind of linear drawing that I'm trying to do here, I'll also incorporate the shadow shape, okay, as kind of a simple, kind of the same level as the outline. Okay, so for example, this is what I would kind of consider to be the shadow shape through here. Now the reason this is important is because you're already starting to decide on what we say is like design your shape, which sounds really fancy, but all it means is just draw it so it makes sense. Okay, so I want to try to map out my shadows before I start painting, so I know where I'm going to put them with the paint. You know, the more you want to stay at this level, you can actually get the objects to look three-dimensional without any values at all, just by the way you are very careful about how you describe the forms, which is really satisfying when you do it right. You know, another reason for doing the whole studies before we do this is when we're doing that, we can see if things make sense, meaning that maybe you put up some objects and you think it looks great, and as you start drawing it out, it becomes less and less interesting to you. And then, you know, if you notice that in your study, then you can make some changes to it. Okay, so one thing that's almost impossible for me to see right now is any kind of shadow pattern on this cup. It's so shiny. all I see when I squint my eyes is just a reflective lighter surface on the front side of it, and then just a slightly darker shape on the side. So there, if you wanted to, you could always go and say, okay, here's where I see that shiny spot on the cup. So you can kind of draw that shape out if you want to, just to keep it as a reference for yourself. But yeah, this is the same way I draw anything at the beginning, at least, looking for this kind of information. Okay, so once I feel like I'm doing pretty well with the drawing side of things, and I don't see any more kind of corrections,
Hi. Is that a vine charcoal that you're using?
yes, I think so. I'll answer it better in 3 seconds. Yeah, I think it's just a piece of vine charcoal. I find it just erases easier. I mean, with this stuff, if you put down something light enough, you can just kind of wipe it off with your hand, which is really cool. We've been using a lot for the longer drawings, this Nitrem charcoal, if you haven't heard of it. It's really great for developing values in a drawing.
What's it called?
I can pass it to Nitrem. Yeah. It's really good because they have different hardnesses. It holds a point better, and it's easier to kind of develop values with. These are great for pushing around stuff, but when you start being really delicate, they kind of get too smushy too fast. But you can use either of them, but yeah, that's something with that. Okay, so we're just about done here with this phase of it. Again, I would spend the time, if I was doing this with no rush, as much as you need, So right now I'm doing the same procedure, just a little bit faster than what I normally do. Okay, so once I get that going, you sharpen it to a little point here. I just go through and I sketch in the shadow value. This again is optional. If I was going to work on the drawing more, I would do this. Okay. And lastly, I'm just going to draw the height of the tabletop here. Just to give myself a plane to start with. Okay. Okay, so I think that's going to be it for my drawing. I like how whenever I say that, then I always do 6 more things. Okay, I think that's all okay. Okay, so I'll correct the rest of the stuff with my brush as I start going. Okay. This is just to kind of keep in mind where the shift in value is going to happen through the background there. Okay. Okay, so this is going to stay in my hand the entire time, except for now. Brushes. Okay, when we're starting out, we try to use the biggest brush for the job. Okay, I don't have anything with me bigger than that, but you know, you can use your judgment on that. Basically, you don't want to start painting a large background with a brush like that. You can, it's possible. It'll probably look really cool too. But so basically, we try to use the biggest brush possible. So if I'm going through and painting this area of the painting, you know, I could probably do a lot with a brush that's about that size. Okay, I can still use the same brush, and if I flip it on that side, I get a brush that's half the size. Okay, so by varying the way you apply the paint, you can do a lot with one. Okay. Okay, so when we start the painting, we definitely want to use larger ones to cover the surface area faster. And then as we refine the painting or get into smaller pieces, we'll switch brushes. Okay. So with the painting, we always start with shadows and background. Okay, so what that means is, I don't know where I'm blocking the camera. Shadows. Okay, so we're going to paint the shadows first of the object. Okay, maybe even the cup. Background, which means everything around the outside of the object, so we're going to close off and leave only the canvas for our objects, and then we'll go through and paint the objects themselves. Okay, so what that basically does for us is it allows us to correct the big shape of the drawing one more time, and it sets up our biggest values. Okay, our biggest values will be this whole mass of the background, tabletop, the front of the table, okay, and then we have smaller masses here. Right. So what I did was I pre-mixed some of these colors. I'm just going to double check really quick how I feel about that one. I feel that's just a little bit too dark. I'm going to lighten that darker background up. A little tip for lightening values. No, so if I have something that's quite dark and I want to lighten it, my options on my palette would be either adding white to it, okay, or adding a lighter color on the palette itself rather than white. Okay. When we add white, it grays off the color and makes it a bit chalky, and sometimes it's exactly what you need. But sometimes, if you want to keep the color a bit richer, try to see, you know, what you can do by adding a bit of yellow to it. For example, if I take the yellow, I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, and I put it next to it, I have a lot of value that can go up by using just the yellow before adding white. Okay. Maybe that's a bit too much too soon. It gets more exciting once we actually start putting paint on the canvas. So.
How are you going to keep the vine charcoal from muddying up your colors?
I don't. I just invite it to do it. No, that wasn't even funny. So I don't worry about it so much in the shadow side of things because the value that I'm going to use for my shadow will be much darker.
If you were doing a lighter painting,
Yeah.
what would you do?
I would still do the same thing. The thing I might do before I actually start painting on it is go up to it and blow it, which right now there's not so much on it, but then everything kind of vanishes a bit. With white objects is a big deal. No? So if I was going to really care about making a clean white area here, maybe I wouldn't do it as much. No, the other objects, you won't even see it in 30 seconds. It goes right away. Charcoal is good because it actually goes into the paint. If you use pencil, it shines through eventually when the paint gets transparent. So something to think about. At least in my experience, that's what's happened. I'm sure there's a very good explanation for it. But. Okay, I know this value that I'm mixing here is just a little bit too dark. I just want to make it a little bit lighter so I don't have to change it later. Okay, let's just go with that. Okay, so as I start the painting here, like I said, shadows first, then background. Let's see. I don't use a ton of medium. I use just enough to kind of move things around. Okay. So I usually kind of like touch the surface of it, put it off to the side as it before I mix it. So the brush, the paint, just as an example, you know, when you put it on, it goes on a bit more like that. And then if you use too much medium, I probably don't need to explain this at all. No? It makes everything really cut out and like, inky at the beginning, okay? It just keeps your edges sharper, and it's easier to sharpen up an edge than to soften one. So if we use a little bit less medium in the paint, that helps too. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to go through and fill in my shadows. I can use the same color because it doesn't matter right now. We're still thinking about drawing, okay? So that last step with the charcoal about filling it in, I actually really don't need to do, but I thought I'd just say it. Okay, so I'm using the same shadow color throughout. And I'll go back and change the color, but what this does for me is it keeps everything unified. It keeps me from going a bit crazy with having different values and different colors right now.
Can you go over a little bit on how to hold a paintbrush?
Yeah,
or
I don't.
how you put down marks?
Yeah, sure. How do we say that? It depends on what I'm doing. So maybe a better example of that would be something like when I go to fill in the background. So one thing when you're painting, I hold it, the brushes are long, and you're supposed to hold it at the back. You can either hold it like that, like this, however you want. I just bought some paintbrushes that are that long, which are super helpful. But the thing you maybe don't want to do is apply so much pressure when you're doing it at the beginning. It all depends on what you want out of it. You know, if you're trying to make a sharp edge or really like define something, you can push harder and really kind of do that. If you do it lighter, it's going to leave more of a fuzzy edge to it. Okay, so at the beginning I try to get an impression with this kind of look maybe, and then as I'm going through I can start to develop it and flatten things out and make them look nicer. But holding it from the back, painting with your arm, not with your wrist. Okay, so that's for when you're trying to draw things out. When you're just filling in a space, it really doesn't matter. You just kind of wail on it and go for it that way. Okay. So as I go through here, okay, the thing with this charcoal is, you know, you do that, it goes away. The second time, it puts paint down. Okay, so you can kind of outline your objects if you want, and you can kind of fill everything in. Okay, so it really looks a bit too kind of brown and warm, so I'm going to change the color of that. Okay, but the first kind of layer of paint I kind of put on thinly, you know, unless I'm really, really confident with it. So again, you could even just start your painting like this without so much drawing at the beginning. I just feel more secure doing it that other way. So another thing, like referring to your question about applying the paint, you know, we can scrub things in, you know, or you can lay it down. When you're covering a big area, I find scrubbing just goes a hell of a lot faster. Okay, so I'm also going to, as I'm doing the background, when I squint my eyes, the black object is really similar to the background. Okay, so as we're painting, we always want to keep our procedure as close to nature as we can. So what that means is, if I went and darkened the background and the floor and started painting the donuts, this is complete opposite of what it should be. No, if anything, it'd be better to take the background value and to paint the cup away, because it'd be closer to the visual impression. Okay, so as we go through here, I'm just going to kind of like dust it down at least. Okay, and I try to keep my edges as soft as I can at the same time. I try not to really make things razor sharp yet. You can kind of even like tickle or blend between the two colors if you need to make them do what you want. And it's also funny, like when you start thinning out the paint on the canvas, all of a sudden that color is not anything what you thought it was going to be in your palette. Oops. So here you can even leave the little highlight. Just leave the canvas for the highlight, for example. That also kind of helps keeping it a little bit closer. So a nice thing about actually starting on a lighter canvas is you can use the light of the canvas to help you kind of imitate something. So by kind of scrubbing more, it gets a lighter value. And then if I put down the paint a bit thicker, it'll go back down in value. So I can kind of imitate that reflection at the beginning, just again, not that it's really necessary, but so again, you can redefine your shapes as you're going along. Okay, so I had to make one for the lower part of the table there, so let's darken down this one. So sometimes I actually put down the paint and then can kind of spread it out too. And all I want is just for this bottom part here to be a little bit darker than the top of it. So that explains the two different planes that are there. Be darker. Okay, that's probably a little bit better. I always try to test out the paint on the canvas. You know? It never hurts to put it on there and see how it looks with everything. Okay, so that's good for now. Okay, so now what I want to do is jump into the background one more time and try to get this a bit darker and better before going on to the objects. So another thing we do almost always is squint as we work. Okay, what that does is it helps us to compress our values, which means it helps us to, when we squint our eyes, it gets rid of anything that's not necessary. You know? So when we squint our eyes, let's see, where's a good place for that. So if we look around this area, okay, when we squint our eyes, at least from where I'm standing, this goes into the background. It's the same value, more or less. No, you can't really see where the edge is. When I look at it with my eyes open, I see the edge. Okay, so what that means is that those two values that are there are the same. So I can, theoretically, as I'm painting, I can just go like that. And it shouldn't hurt anything at all. Okay. On the other side, the value here needs to get a little bit lighter. And at the very top of the cup again, on the side, the same thing happens, but with the lighter side. So right now, what I want to do is to start to key the painting at the same time. So keying it means just arranging your values. So you can start making something, let's say let's take one of the darkest objects. That wasn't said very well. If we take the darkest value in our painting, which could be this little spot here or somewhere over here, we establish that, and then we start relating everything to it. Okay, we can do the same thing with the lights. We can say, okay, we can key off of our lights. We can put, you know, the light value there, and then we adjust all the other values to work with that one. Okay, so as soon as I kind of fill in the background again, I'm going to start with that. Okay, the reason I'm doing vertical brushstrokes here is because the light catches it if I do it that way. So if I do it vertically, then I get less glare. At least better than what it was. Okay, so like I was saying before, we want to make sure that the edge of the cup here is just a little bit darker than our background, so we can give it something. It's not black, huh? But it has to be darker than there. So that will help us to find a better value for that area. And again, because I don't have black on my palette, I'm just using the dark blue, the ultramarine, kind of as a replacement black. And also on my palette here, which maybe you can't see, when I think I have something that will work, on my palette I touch it next to the color of the background, and I can already see its contrast on my palette. So if that contrast on my palette looks good, then I continue. If it looks really off, then I try to get it a bit closer. Okay, so if I find that that works okay, then I'll just kind of carry it across the painting. And what I'm really trying to do is connect this value up to the back one. Okay. Again, color is not that critical right now still. If I start painting this red, then maybe I should think about changing my career. Or just get glasses. Okay, so all I really want to do here is just to keep my eye moving through the painting. If I have big jumps in value, that's not good enough then, and I should stick with it. Okay. It's also good sometimes to stand outside of your view spot. So when you're standing in the same spot all the time, you don't really see what you have. So usually I stand about this far away and just look at it for a second. And if everything looks like it's going well, I keep going. If not, say a prayer. Okay, so now that I have kind of like the background established roughly, okay, nothing's like locked into place. The drawing's still kind of wonky up through here and whatnot. But once I get the the value is a bit more locked in, then I can come in and fix the drawing with a brush stroke. Okay, so I'm not too worried about anything up there yet. And it's also not an excuse for doing a bad drawing. I can do it better than that. But it's all about the impression at first and then tidying up the impression. Okay, so we're going to jump back to the shadows of the objects now. Right now, as I put down the table, they're the same value as the table, or they're maybe not dark enough. No? Especially underneath these like 3 parts through here. Okay, and what that does is it doesn't make the table look like it has light on it. It looks pretty dim. So if we go through there and we can kind of darken down our shadows a bit there. A little note that since they look dark, if they become the same value as that guy, you've gone too far. Okay, they should appear to be similar, but they shouldn't be the same. Okay, and the color can be anything you want it to be. Meaning color is one of those things that if I say this is like, I don't even know. Like if I ask someone to tell me what color is the tablecloth, maybe you say green, no? But I can also say it's gray, or it's like a reddish grayish green, you know, which if you put red and green together, it just kind of makes mud eventually. So that's why whenever we're learning or talking about it, we always talk about in terms of value. And then we can, discuss color as it comes. But So as I'm painting, I'm trying to mimic the shape that I see for the shadow as well. Instead of making kind of like an outline and filling it in, I try to get it as close as I can with the brush, and then I can always go back and kind of adjust it. So, if I put down something too big, I can go back and cut it, with the table, for example, and make the shape really thin and much more precise, we can say.
Do you intentionally make your shadows a cooler color? Or do you mostly rely on what you see?
I almost always rely on what I see. When I get confused about what I see, then I ask myself that question, like, what temperature? Is the light that I'm painting under? Like, is it a cooler light? If it's a cooler light, usually the shadows are warmer. Usually they're opposite. I think there is a whole kind of theory about that, about turning forms with warmer and cooler colors, along the edge of the shadow and all that kind of stuff. But I honestly just rely on what I see. It's always the value. I know I probably said it and you don't want to hear it again, but if that's off, nothing else matters, because the value's wrong, the color's not going to make the value better. So the funny thing with color and all that kind of stuff is the closer you get the value, the color is easy. Then it's just like, it looks more red, and you put more red. If it looks more of a bluish red, you can use a cooler red or add blue to it. and kind of play back and forth with it. It is one of those mystery things that, you know, everyone sees color differently too. Like I know I just said that a second ago, but also, I'm trying to think and paint at the same time. But yeah, I would just say that, like, I can't put too much preconceived ideas on what something should be. I just, if I put it there and it looks right, I'll keep it. If it doesn't, then I change it. That's what that's what I do. And sometimes it does not work. You know, sometimes it's like, okay, think about it again. Most of the time, it usually gets you there. When I usually teach in Sweden in the summers at the Florence Academy. And the director there's a really great guy, and he was talking about that too. He showed a still life painting done, you know, a study of it done one way. They completely changed the colors around in the other two images, and you don't notice it at first. You're just like, what's the difference? Oh, there's the difference, the color. But it's not the first thing you notice. Okay, moving on. Okay, so now that I have my background established, I've darkened the values on the surface of the table a little bit more, which, you know, they can be adjusted as we're working on it. Here, I would say that the shadows are a little bit warmer in general compared to this kind of cooler light system that we have here, which is actually quite nice. Okay, so now we can start blocking in our donuts. Okay, same thing. If we start thinking about what donut doesn't need to be touched, is this guy still, okay? When I put the value here, it's going to be very similar to what's there already, all right? So I'm going to start by painting these two guys first, and we'll finish with that one. Okay. The other thing we should be doing constantly as we're working here is thinking about how does it look already, no? How is our contrast between this and that? If it's too much, we have to darken it. No, if it's not enough, then we actually have to lighten it. If that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to start with the donut with the frosting on it. Again, the first color I put down is probably going to be a little bit off, so we'll adjust it. So as I put that there already, it's a little bit too light. No, it should be a little bit darker than the table. So when we squint our eyes, no, this has to be a slightly darker value than that one. If they're the same, it gets kind of mushy. No. So I have this kind of pile of paint on my palette. I'll keep that as a general one. I'll go off to the side, and then I'll remix off to the side of it, so I don't disturb the entire quantity of the paint. And as we're darkening it as well, you can kind of direct its color. You know? So if you add red, it's going to go really red. If you add black, you could just add just black. It tends to kill the color a bit. You know? So usually add color to it as I'm going. That's probably going to be way too dark. So I'll do another little test run here. Okay, that looks a little bit closer, I think. So like as we were saying at the beginning with the applying the paint, if I apply it across this whole, so what I'm trying to do right here is put a brush stroke across that one. If I go kind of light-handed across the whole thing, it gets a bit kind of, how would you say that? Kind of skims the surface and leaves kind of a patchiness to it. But it's enough to get an idea if it's going to work or not. If it works, you push it on more. If it doesn't, it's easier to fix it because you don't have so much paint in your canvas already. Okay, so it's like ghosting in, if you want to say, not to scare anyone. You can laugh at the jokes too. Yeah. Okay. The other thing I'm doing, which you might not know, is I'm switching brushes for every color. I'm not using just one brush for everything. If I did that, it would all look like mud. So it's important for value, because if I use the same brush for the background, everything will look the same. Okay. So it's important you go by section. So I have one for the dark background, one for the medium one. So I have a brush for this, brush for that, and another brush for that one. Okay. Here I can go up and down in value, and the same thing through here, but I don't want to use those together. Okay. If you flip back and forth too much, you get the same value, and it kills this impression. So as I'm painting the donut, I switch brushes. So I'm going to grab another one. Okay, same thing. Put down the color, step back, think about it. You can call a friend. Okay, but I try to cover the whole area, because if I leave stuff showing, then you don't get an accurate reading. Okay, so as I'm doing that, it looks like it's okay in some parts. I think it's okay for the lightest part of the area. Okay, but at the back here and the edge, it's too bright, I think. No, it doesn't, it feels a little bit out of place. Okay, so if I need that, again, same idea. Take a little bit off to the side. Kind of reestablish these shadows through here a little bit. Okay, so I think that's good enough for now for that part of it again. So this is going to be like, we'll do a first pass, then we'll try to go back one more time and kind of push it just a little bit further if we can. No more questions so far? You can make them up too. It's also fun. They don't even have to be about this painting. They can just be about life.
As someone who hasn't painted before, when is the best, when is the best time for them to start? Because, I know that, you have to have a certain amount of drafting draftsman skills,
Yeah.
and I was just wondering, like when are you ready to use those skills and transfer them over to painting?
It really depends on who you ask. If you're asking me, that wasn't a joke though. That was me trying to be serious. That was funny though. Yeah. No, but the honest thing is that, you know, when we go and study these things, drawing is probably the most important thing. Even with sculpture, Johanna would probably agree that, you know, drawing is 99.3% of the game. Okay. But the problem is if you only draw and you never paint, you don't get the sensitivity to the medium. No, so there's nothing wrong with painting whenever you want. I think it's actually a good thing. You know. The only problem with painting is it's a bit kind of more loose, in a way. It's a harder medium to control. Changes quite quickly. More things to think about as you're doing it. So what I mean to say about all this is, yes, do it, but don't sacrifice drawing skills, you know, for the painting things yet. The painting will get better the better you can draw. So I would start now. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm just trying to wash and kind of color over the whole thing so I can start to see what I'm doing. When I made my first brush strokes up here, the first one was just to check contrast. Okay, I need to have the background slightly darker than the donut up there. Okay, and if it's not, I stop myself and do that. Again, this is another reason for painting the background first. Okay, especially in this situation. If this starts working, we can use this as I'm probably blocking the camera, a judge or like a key. So this is a midtone, we can say. All of the midtones change depending on what's next to it. So if this background was lighter, this would also be lighter. If this was darker, this wouldn't have to be as bright. Okay. So that's another reason why we start with the background. Do you want the serious answer, the joking one? We start with the background just because it sets up our big values. I'm listening.
So I have the mic, so I'm gonna ask the question again. So, like, the reason why you start with the background,
Yep.
is that to prevent the when you're painting the objects, it makes it look cleaner, or?
No, it helps me to judge values. You know, so what that does is it allows me, let's say, because if I started on a white surface or like a very light area, I wouldn't know how bright this should be and how dark that should be. You know? It's all kind of a guess. The way I can start the opposite way is I could actually paint this first, which is our brightest object, and then next I would actually go paint the background and keep darkening it until I have the correct contrast through here, and then I could fill in the background, if you know what I mean. It's just choosing a direction, but usually it's best to start with one of the extremes. If you stay in the middle too long, it just becomes a bit dim. You don't get that sensation of reality as well.
Do you choose? And do you choose the point where the either the objects, like if the objects are taking up more of the space, do you start with the objects, or?
Yeah, so I start with the biggest. So there's two ways to think about it. One is value-based, no? And the other thing is like how do I say that clearly? So if I was painting a big object, and it leaves the canvas to be this color, or this value, and it needs to be a different one, I would start with that big object. If the big object was very similar, like we're doing with this donut, then I would leave that object empty for a long time because it doesn't do anything. You know, if I put a brushstroke there, you wouldn't see it. It's like if I go and put something here, it's the same value, doesn't do anything.
Okay, I have two questions.
Two answers.
Let's say you don't finish this.
Who's saying that? Okay, I'll stop.
I'm saying,
Go ahead.
I'm predicting that you don't finish this.
Yeah.
So then will you wait for it to dry before you work on it again, or would you go ahead and work on it tomorrow? And if you do wait for it to dry, do you have to oil it in first before you begin on your areas that you're going to paint?
Good questions. If I work on this tomorrow, which I don't think is a possibility, but if I did, I would go into it. The problem with the painting being wet is if you need to make changes, or if I need to do something here and every time I do it, it just kind of sinks in with the next color and it's just not going anywhere, I either take my palette knife and I scrape off the whole thing, okay? So there's not so much paint to push through, or I let it dry. No. Using dryers in your paint is not a good practice. They're not really archival. So we don't say to use dryers. Otherwise, you can put a drying medium in your paint, and then it will dry in a couple hours, you know? But it also might explode in a few years. So if you're doing it as a joke to a friend, then definitely use a dryer. No, but I really, when you're working by yourself, you can let something dry for a couple of days and go back to it. You know, when we're in this kind of studio environment, working in or at a school, every day you're working on that project, and some days you arrive and it's completely wet and you can't do anything. No. So to make that not such a long-winded answer, if it doesn't allow you to do what you want to do because it's too wet, you don't do anything about it. You let it dry. And I try to work on the paintings day after day. No. So
if you do let it dry,
yeah.
Do you oil it in before you start?
Oh, that's the other part.
Again.
Yes and no. This is a whole thing that drives people crazy, the whole sinking in and oiling in of your painting. If you break the fat over lean rule and start sinking in the first day, you know what sinking is, no?
No.
So sinking in is when you paint the first day, everything looks really nice and like luminous. The next day you come back, it looks completely matte.
Okay, that was going to be my second question.
Yeah, so that. From where you're standing, it almost looks like what's happening here. It's just there's so much glare from the lights. So if this is pure black and it looks like a gray color, it's sunken in. The oil has been absorbed into the canvas and out of the paint, and it looks dry and matte.
Right. So
people oil in the painting, so they take their medium or oil and very thinly rub it on top of the surface, and it's like varnishing your painting. Okay. You can do that but then the problem is that it's going to sink in again into your painting, so you have to put more oil into the painting. No? So if you paint on top of that oil, that when you oil your painting, if you paint on top of the oil the same day, you're fine. You're integrating the paint into the oil layer. If you're not, then you'll start building up oily layers, and then funny things start to happen. So the first few passes over the project, I don't oil it out. So I would let this come back tomorrow, dry or not dry, continue painting. Okay. After I get a couple layers on and I just need to start resolving something, and it has sunken in, then I'll oil out that area. So let's say this will sink in like crazy because it's really dark and has a lot of oil in it. So I go, and if I want to finish this, I oil out this section here, and I repaint that section. But I don't oil out the whole painting because I won't get to that in that session. A friend of mine was here a few months ago named LeoMancini-Hresko, and he's really good with materials. He basically taught me stuff. I'm probably saying it wrong now, but like I said, it's really nice to figure out these things because a lot of this is all about like how much oil to use, what kind of medium to use, you know. And that's really stuff. That stuff is really important if it affects your painting. No, it's really easy to get absorbed in it too, or forget about painting.
So I'm still a little bit confused. So
Good.
is this painting going to be really matte when it dries?
Yeah, it will sink in. Yes.
Okay, so then just varnishing it will bring it back alive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I try not to do too many things in between that stage, because the more I do there, it kind of messes the process up a little bit. But to be honest, don't think about it. Just do what you got to do. Yeah, that stuff becomes a problem when you work on something for a long period of time. You know, a lot of people these days do like one-day paintings, and there you can do whatever you want to do. There's nothing that you have to worry about. But when you work on it for months and months or even a year, then you have to start thinking a bit more about your game plan. That wasn't so good. So every time I touch the painting here, I'm trying to better the impression. You know? So everything I do, the intention is to make it better. No? So if I do some looking at places to kind of adjust, it's like, okay, this looks too flat, and this right now has too much contrast between the shadow and this next value I put there. So it's missing this kind of like mid-tone value, right? So before jumping around to somewhere else, I just want to put that on there so it doesn't look awkward, you know. Because I want the objects to keep kind of like turning in a way. So like that value I put down was too light at the bottom here. This should actually get darker than the top, and now it's too similar. So it doesn't look like it does anything for me, so I'm going to try to darken that too. You know, for me, this is like the most exciting time of painting is this part. Afterwards, it gets kind of boring. I thought I'd just share my feelings with you, that's all. No, the reason for that, at least for me, the reason for that is that everything's still flexible, you know? And this is where you see like the biggest change. You know, from here on out, when you start to kind of tighten things up a bit more, there definitely is a change, no? But it's not as dramatic, and every time you put down something, every time it looks good. Okay, so I just want to kind of darken down that area through here. So if I mess this up, it's not that big of a deal. I'll just lose my job, but other than that. No, what I mean to say is like I need to put down the values once, and then I can go back the second time and adjust them. So the closer you get the first time, the less work you do the second time, but you know. And again, I'm using these values that I've already established through here to judge this one. So every time I put that brushstroke down, if it doesn't look like it's actually kind of going underneath, that it's not dark enough. So it should give that illusion, at least a hint at it. No, still not there yet. Okay, so I'm going to try putting on the rest of the values up on the top there, and then we'll revisit that. Okay, so for now, I'm actually going to go through and skip this section, put the top on, and see what is left behind from that. Okay, so if I do just pure white, just to give myself an idea of what that will look like, okay, it will look something like that. Okay. When you paint with just pure white, it's fine for value, but the color is lost completely. No, there's not really so much color in white by itself. If you go to the museums, you start looking at paintings with that intention. Every light color that's put on the painting, every light color, most of the time it has a color to it. You know, a highlight on a vase or even a landscape. I went to the Irvine Museum the other day, and there's amazing seascapes with the sun reflecting in it. And it looks so bright, but every color is like a dimmer, like white, yellow color. And it really shimmers. Okay? So just keep that in mind. There's nothing wrong with using colors just directly as they are. But if you want to impress someone, try doing it with color inside of the mixture. Okay, so here we need to think about where is the light stopping. So in this area through here and under, it's going to have a darker value to turn the form. Okay, then on the outline of the shape, it will have a lot of contrast, but we don't want to make it razor sharp, otherwise it'll go flat. Okay, so we can kind of imitate that at the beginning with, you know, not really pushing the edge on too much, or pushing with too much pressure, I should say. know, sometimes you can actually kind of follow the form of the brush and it kind of enhances it a little bit. So if I start putting that on and it starts looking too bright already, I have two choices. Either I lighten the background, okay, or I can add more color to my white, okay, which would make it more chromatic. Okay, so with this again, I'm going to switch to another brush. That's fine. Okay, and again, the same thing. I have one mixed already, but I think it's going to be a bit off. So we'll see. It's okay. I think it can be just a little bit darker and brighter. Again, here we don't make any big jumps in value. If it looks all patchy, maybe your values are a little bit too far apart from each other. Okay, and you can kind of just pat it on. Here the edge got a little bit too sharp, so if I just overlap the paint, it'll soften that up a little bit more. You know, the worst thing you can do at this point is leave a gap between the values and the paint. That's what really hurts you, because then you have these little halos around the painting. Okay, I still think that the value can get a bit darker. Yeah. Wow, okay, no problem.
Do you prefer to paint in silence or to music?
Yeah. I actually like have music playing, I think. Depends. Damn. Does that mean silence? Yes, silence. No, I usually have music playing, to be honest. But but usually I have other people around, no? So usually we're kind of talking and telling each other jokes and whatnot. And then when we're outside painting plein air or landscape, you have a lot of random people come up and tell you about all their life's problems. You have a lot of people come up and just tell you about all their life problems, no? Which is also very entertaining. So therefore we don't need music outside. But yeah. No, but it really just depends. Sometimes you're really focused and you actually, even if you put music on or something, you wouldn't notice it. And other days you're just not focused and the music kind of keeps you going. When I was, just before I left Florence for a couple of years, I was sharing a studio with some friends, and that was great because all the three of us would be in there every day, 7 days a week. And we'd just be talking. We wouldn't look at each other at all because we'd be focused on what we're doing. So we'd be talking with our backs to each other. But it was great. We got a lot of stuff done, good conversations. And yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was good. I don't even know if I answered your question. I'm just going around it. But so depending on my mood, yes. The best thing is when you're outside, you have your headphones in, and people come up and talk to you, and if you don't want to talk to them, you just have headphones. No? There's no music playing. You just have headphones in. I know someone's going to come find me now outside and do that to me. Okay, so basically with this thing, I mean, there's no way to get it finished in a couple hours. I mean, yes, there is. If you really go with the intent that you have only 2 hours to paint something, it's amazing what you can get done, if you're trying to finish something. What I was thinking about doing here, instead of trying to finish something, it's more about kind of verbalizing the process of things, which maybe is more interesting.
So what would you call finished painting?
Still life with donuts. What would I title it? No, I know.
What is a finished painting?
A finished painting is when you don't know what to do, when everything seems like it's working well. I think right now with this painting, I think that in general the values are working okay. I can quickly just kind of block out these last 3 ones. The highlight really doesn't matter, it's just be of a cooler color. But a finished painting to me is when it gets the impression really well and there's nothing that looks awkward, no? So
so this would have achieved that goal, right?
Of this, if you ask my mom, yes, but no. This is, for me, would be like the first pass over the painting. Okay. Again, just trying to keep everything organized as you're filling it in. So once the painting is filled in, which is now almost, I'll do this things really quickly. Then I would say, okay, this is finished. It's blocked in, no? Everything's kind of put down. The thing that's left is to go back through and reorganize, clean up edges, shapes, transitions, If you want to have more of a finished, rendered look to the painting, it just means passing over and kind of tightening up the drawing, tightening up the shapes. I really like a painting when it doesn't make any sense, the closer you get to it, but as soon as you stand away, all of a sudden it looks real. Not like photograph, but like you feel like there's space around everything. I think that's a really interesting achievement.
What kind of brushes do you prefer to use with oils?
I always use the bristle brushes, to be honest, like the hog hair brushes. Like that kind of stuff. But also, using some sable brushes are very good for really sharp detail. I can show you those when we're done here. I definitely think having a variety of brushes helps. But the brush I use the most they're the ones I'm using now, which are the bristle brushes. It's also important to think about how long the hairs are as well. The shorter the hairs, the more short the brush strokes are. They don't hold as much paint.
Joe, who are your favorite painters that you look up to?
Living or deceased?
Living or dead, doesn't matter.
That's not very nice. I like a lot of the Impressionist painters. Dennis Bunker is one of my favorite painters, I guess. I have to say something.
Can you say that name again?
Dennis Bunker. Dennis Miller Bunker. I think he's got a few paintings that are pretty amazing. I think he's one of those guys who were academically trained and started painting outside, you know, being a little bit more expressive with the brushstrokes, but still understanding what it takes to make a painting look real. He died really young, so it's kind of a shame. Right now, he's one of my favorite painters, I think. But again, the thing I love the most is going to a museum with no expectations and then discovering a new person, whether it be a painter or a sculptor too. I think that's probably the most exciting thing.
So as Joe is doing his last touch-up strokes on this demonstration, the New Masters Academy was very excited as Joe was doing a whole charcoal drawing video with us. So it was a whole course that he has been doing with LeoMancini-Hresko together. The two of them were showing the process of the Florence Academy of Art size method, which is a very unique method, and it takes a lot of knowledge and patience. And Joe has been doing a fully rendered charcoal drawing with us that he was demonstrating, and he is very solid when it comes to understanding values. So Joe is also, he has been teaching at the Florence Academy of Art 10 years ago, after he has been teaching in Barcelona at the Barcelona Academy of Art. And after that, he also has been teaching in Sweden. Joe's work is represented in the United States and currently in a Swedish gallery, which I cannot remember its name. Joe, what was
It's called
the name?
Gallery Torakov.
Torakov.
Yeah.
So Joe is a fantastic landscape painter, still life painter, also figure painter. And we are going to invite, with we, I mean the New Masters Academy is going to invite him back to come and do a whole still life series. So he's going to be doing the painting portion of the Florence Academy of Art approach which is a realism approach. And he's fulfilling the whole still life portion of it because he is very, very good at explaining how the values onto still lifes. And so this year is going to be coming back, and so we will also add the whole painting portion to the drawing portion that's coming out soon.
Is there any other questions I can answer or anything? Otherwise, I'm kind of just going in circles
Can
here.
you remind us what your medium mixture is and the percentage?
Yeah.
I didn't catch it at the beginning.
Yeah. So there's nothing special, to be honest. It's just linseed oil and turpentine.
Okay.
What was the third one that you had mentioned?
It's called spike lavender oil. And all that is like a fancy turpentine. It just doesn't evaporate as fast. I've only been using that for maybe a few months now, so it's nothing that I could write a report on. But I found with the turpentine that it outside evaporates really fast, and it starts to already sink in and get matte. And this one stays a bit more oily in a way, and it cuts the paint more too. So that's nice. So I've been using that, but to be honest with mediums, the less you get into it, the better. Just using just linseed oil is fine too. Not using any medium is also great. Unless you want to get into glazing and all this other kind of stuff, then it's a bit more important, what you're using. Yeah, so with linseed oil, I use probably half and half, no? At least when I begin the project, I do. If you have to do anything, use more turpentine at the beginning. But I really use it just to help me push the paint around. That's why I try to find paints that are more fluid out of the tube, so I don't have to use so much medium. No. Also with the oil primed canvas, it's much more slick. So at the same time, you don't have to use so much medium. But again, that's completely personal preference. There's people who actually put oil on their canvas before they start painting, and they start painting into the oil to push their paint around. Experimentation is probably the best thing to do.
Do you ever do glazing, and could you explain that process, please?
Woo. Do you have another couple hours? Glazing. Yes and no. I've, for some reason, have developed a habit that if something doesn't work, I just paint over it until it works, instead of using glazing to kind of resolve things. So therefore, I'm not going to be the most helpful person when it comes to that. But
Joe, do you glaze donuts?
I was getting to it. That was the punchline.
The question was,
Thanks.
Is Joe glazing glazed donuts?
No, but really with glazing, I think it's a great thing to do. It needs to be done when the paint is dry, though, of course, so you have to let it dry. Glazing can either be done by building up the painting to a much lighter value and then glazing it back down, by doing layers of colors to darken the painting back to the value it should be. Or it's really good just to kind of shift temperatures. So if I come in tomorrow, in a few days, and I look at my still life, I'm like, oh my god, the whole background looks red and needs to be blue. I can glaze the whole thing with a duller color, bluer color, black even. Start shifting all the colors that way, and then I paint into that, if you know what I mean. So that's how I've used it before, but I've never really done such a long project where that's the sole purpose is to glaze on it. we've been kind of transient the last few years, so I haven't had really time to work on a painting for more than a few weeks, And I think if you did a whole project through glazing, you probably need a fair chunk of time just to kind of go back and forth with it a lot.
What do you use to varnish your painting at the very end?
The question was, what are you using to varnish your painting at the very end?
That's a good question too. If I remember to do it, I usually just use Damar varnish, and I use a little bit of turpentine with that to dilute it, so it's not so gummy and sticky, and it dries a little bit faster. What else? There are a million different varnishes. Sometimes even your painting medium is good enough for a varnish, but the varnish is there to help to protect the surface of the painting. Yeah, but again, I just used Damar varnish. I've been using that ever since I started painting for varnishing the painting at the end. I think Gamblin makes something that is very easy to use. Gamvar, I think it's called. And you just put it on directly out of the bottle. And it dries really fast, which is great because then you get all this cat hair stuck in the painting. Because then they can figure out how old it is, and that's kind of an issue. So that one was pretty good too. No pressure.
So if you were to glaze,
Yep.
what's the formula that you would use for
This-
the medium?
For the medium. Oof. Where's Leo when you need him? You can also Google. Google is great for those kinds of things. No, but really it depends. You just need. So a friend, Mark DeLesio, has a medium that he uses Canadian balsam in, which is like a resin. That's really good for glazing. Yeah. Yeah, I can try. It's basically Canadian balsam is the name of this kind of resin. It's super thick. You can use that for glazing. That with some oil and turpentine again. It has a hard paint surface when it dries, and that's one of the reasons for using it. So when it dries, it doesn't sink in as much, as we were saying. But then it's also very sticky to work with, and all this kind of stuff. You can glaze with just linseed oil too, to be honest, just with linseed oil, just with the painting medium. But if you really want to get into that, I would definitely read about it a bit, because there definitely are mediums that are better for certain things, No, a lot of what we do is kind of, they call it direct painting, So I guess I'm going in circles over that little stupid brushstroke over there and it's just not getting to be the way I want it. I just keep going back and forth on it until it does what I want it to do. As opposed to letting it dry and then kind of glazing in more intense color on top of it.
So Joe, as we are coming to the end of this painting demonstration, what would be your quick last touch-ups that you only have like 10 seconds left? What would be important to do to bring
I'd probably just sign my
to
name.
finish your painting?
I just put my signature on it. No, I think if I had to do anything more to it, I would probably go through and, Jesus Christ. Try to put the highlight down a little bit, or put a color on for it so it doesn't look so yellow. You can always go around and play with your edges. That does a lot for you. If I want to go through here and I want this to come forward more, if I can go in and really push down on the paintbrush, it'll sharpen up the edge and hopefully bring it closer towards us. if you get rid of the glare. But again, if this was going to be a longer, more drawn-out project, I would go and do the complete opposite thing. I would actually go and soften everything so it dries a little bit blurry around the edges. And the reason for that is that the next day we come back to work on it, it's much more flexible. It's a lot easier to sharpen up something than it is to soften something in oil paint when it dries. So if I was going to continue working on this more, I would actually go through and do something like making sure all these edges were kind of blurred a bit more. Okay, so then the next day that I come back to paint on it, I can go and bring back a sharper edge to it. Okay. I think in painting, that's one of the big complaints from people, or the hard things to do, is get the edges to work well.
So one last question, it comes from the audience. How do you clean your brushes when you're done?
There are some good answers for that. Depends on how lazy you are. Do you want all of them, or just the lazy one?
The cracked one and the lazy one.
Check. Okay. The lazy one is you put them in a plastic bag and you throw them in your freezer at home. Hopefully you don't have this, you have a separate freezer for your food and for your paints. What that does is the lack of oxygen and the temperature slows down the drying time of the paint. So if you're painting the next day, you wrap them up in a plastic bag, throw them in the freezer, take them out, they defrost, you continue on. It's great when you're on the road painting, when you don't have a sink to wash them in. When you are washing them, because you spent $1,000 on brushes and you don't want to lose them, it's best to, you can do two ways. One is wipe off all the paint with a rag. You can use some turpentine. Where's my bag? I have a little turpentine container with a little strainer at the bottom, so everything falls down. And then I wash it with soap and water. You don't have to turp them off. You can just directly wash them in soap and water. But then you're just putting a lot of paint down the drain, which is not so eco-friendly. So there's that.
Okay, Joe, I think we're coming to the end of this demonstration. It's been really, really beautiful to watch you do this in such a short amount of time to make this beautiful painting. New Masters Academy say thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you so much. And we all had a lot of donuts here. And now we can eat those donuts that lay in there.
If you want to. All right. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to come and play with the mirror, they can come play with the mirror.
Great job, Joe.
Thanks.
Yeah, looks so good.
Good job, Joe.
Thanks, God.